We thought we were going to preview the NBA draft. That was the original plan here on Locked On Grizzlies. But the Memphis Grizzlies had different plans for us on this evening. A seismic shift for the Memphis Grizzlies. I've been clamoring for them to go all in for about a year now. I wouldn't call this all in, but this is definitely pushing some chips into the middle of the table. Marcus Smart is now a member of the Memphis Grizzlies. We're going to talk about that more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You know, Damichael, I thought that I would return easily, right?
Welcome back, Joe.
An NBA draft preview show, nice and easy. We'll talk about a Podziemski here, a Colby Jones there, guys that I had already profiled after a couple days off. Not allowed. We're completely flipping the script. It's an emergency edition of Locked On Grizzlies with a pretty significant trade that solves a lot of problems, in my opinion, for the Memphis Grizzlies. We're going to talk about that more on this edition of the show. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA, and they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out over on YouTube. Damichael Cole, the commercial appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Grizzlies beat writer, does a phenomenal job covering the team. And you and I talked a little bit before the show. You know, I work over at Bluff City Media. You, of course, with the CA. We're in draft previews. We're putting finishing touches on things. It was going to be a long night tomorrow night. That was supposed to be the late night. But Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN dropping the bomb after the Clippers fall out of the Boston-Washington trade. Now it is the Grizzlies who replace that as the third wheel, the third player, the third team in the deal. Tyus Jones goes to the Washington Wizards, which we'll talk about probably on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Grizzlies a little bit. But for the sake of time, this is a 30-minute or so podcast. We are going to focus on Marcus Smart arriving in Memphis. First off, before we talk about the cost, because that was one of the things that was brought up on Twitter in the immediate aftermath of the deal, your initial reaction when you read that the Memphis Grizzlies had acquired Marcus Smart?
Defense, wing defense. That's what we've talked about, right? I initially thought, oh wait, he's a guard, but then you throw that out the window when you're talking about Marcus Smart. Just like with a Drew Holiday, when you see Drew Holiday when the Bucks played the Nets, who was guarding Kevin Durant? It wasn't the other small forwards. It was Drew Holiday, and that's the same case with Marcus Smart. He's a big guard who guards everywhere. I mean, 1 through 5. People in Memphis are going to love what he brings on the defensive end. A better decision maker than a guy like Dylan Brooks, who he's kind of a replacement for in a way. He's kind of a 2-in-1 replacement, replacing Tyus Jones and Dylan Brooks. But initial reaction was the defense, and he's going to bring that. We've talked about it. You more than me, Joe, have talked about the need for that wing defender. Now you check off the box, and now the Grizzlies have the last 2 Defensive Player of the Year winners on one team.
I don't have the history books in front of me, but I don't think that's ever happened before.
With a guard and a forward, it probably is. I mean, that's wild.
That seems pretty wild. And you've got, in theory, Steven Adams, who's a decent big man defender. Desmond Bane has come a long way as a defender. And we'll talk about how Marcus Smart fits the Grizzlies later on in this part or this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, because I think that there's 2 different ways they could go. We'll talk about it more later in the show. My reaction when I saw the trade was excitement, because this is a guy who, despite his size, to your point a moment ago, he can play with John Morant. And that's one of the things I've been clamoring for. You need a combo guard, backup guard kind of player who, unlike Tyus Jones, is capable of playing with Ja Morant. And there's 2 criteria that you need to check off to fit that box. One, you have to be able to defend multiple perimeter players because Ja can only defend point guards, essentially. The lesser perimeter threat is who you want Ja Morant on long term. And again, I understand that Ja Morant's about to be suspended 25 games. We're going to talk about that more here on Locked On Grizzlies momentarily. I'm talking about the long-term view because Marcus Smart has a few years left on his deal. So this could be a potential long-term situation with Marcus Smart coming to the Grizzlies. So it's Ja, Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane. You have to be able to shoot the 3 to play next to Ja Morant, and or you have to be able to defend at an elite level. And Marcus Smart checks at least one of those boxes. He struggled from 3 in the regular season, but he actually did pretty well in the postseason.
Big-time playoff shot maker. Yeah.
And I think that's another key part of this for me, Damichael. He instantly, upon arrival in Memphis, he's the second oldest player on the roster at the age of 29, which was not the case in Boston, right? You had Al Horford and other guys that were the veteran leaders. Now it's Marcus Smart, who is that heart and soul leader of the team, at least on the floor in game competing. He brings a championship caliber pedigree, right? The fact that he is coming to Memphis, similar to Tony Allen in a way. Marcus Smart obviously better than Tony Allen was, but at the same time, the fact that Smart has with him the experience of playing on a team that has been to the Eastern Conference Finals as much as the Celtics have over these last 5 or so years, this is exactly what the Grizzlies need. This guy is about basketball. This guy is going to compete his tail off. He is going to bring the right kind of energy to a young Memphis roster that desperately needs an injection of strong, positive energy.
Yeah, that's what he's going to bring. He's going to bring that energy. He's going to bring that leadership. He's going to bring that veteran presence. It's funny because they knocked out so many boxes with just one move, which is rather impressive because we spent all this time, and this is why it's impressive. We spent all this time basically saying the Grizzlies got one roster spot, to pretty much extra roster spot without trading guys. They ended up trading Tyus Jones, so they still have one standard roster spot available.
Right.
But before today, we talked about how the Grizzlies have one roster spot, and they had multiple needs. We talked about backup point guard. We talked about the need for a wing defender. They got both of those with this one guy, and they traded out one guy. So you still have another roster spot to do some things there and potentially add a guy on the wing, or if it's another guard for depth you want there, or whatever the case may be. The options are endless at this point, but I like the value in this, not just from the contract perspective, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but from the fact that the Grizzlies said, hey, we added a guy who can step in and start for Ja Morant at point guard when he's out. He can play alongside of Ja Morant, potentially, if that's something we choose to do. And how do you like this lineup, potentially? You could start the season, in theory, right now. We'll see what moves are made in free agency. But right now, the Grizzlies could potentially roll out a lineup of Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, Luke Kennard, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Steven Adams. This is why this is big. Tyus Jones, if he's your starting point guard, you're not starting Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard.
You can't.
But the difference between Marcus Smart and Tyus Jones in this case is now it allows you to start those two guys because, in a way, Luke Kennard is just a bigger Ja Morant in front in terms of your weaker defender on the perimeter. And the people who've watched Luke Kennard, he tries, he gives effort. I don't think he's like a cone out there or anything. Like he's going to give effort. So with that being the case, you got Desmond Bane, you got Luke Kennard. Now you got a 3-time all-defensive team player and a former defensive player of the year in Marcus Smart. That's the big thing that stood out to me. The value, the all-around value, where the Grizzlies hit on so many different benchmarks with just one player.
He is like and we'll talk more about this with the fit here in a moment. He is like Steven Adams in that he contributes in so many ways without having to score the basketball. Like, I'm going to go bet a future on Desmond Bane or Jaren, maybe both of them, Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. All-Star because those guys are going to get so many opportunities to score the basketball because Marcus Smart's going to be able to find them. He's not as good at that as Tyus Jones is, but because of the spacing of Luke Kennard and Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane, those are three legitimate shooters. Marcus Smart, we're going to talk more about it here in a moment. I'm excited about the fit. I think it's going to work really well, and I'm fired up that they were able to pull this off. We'll talk about the cost and all that sort of stuff here next on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Birddogs. Ooh, Damichael, I don't know about you, but after finding out about this trade, I had to slip into some Birddogs because it is a wonderful stretch khaki short that uses anti-stink sweat-wicking fabric. It keeps you cool and dry. I was so fired up, I needed to cool down and calm down. I put on my Birddogs. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of some sort of stiff, restricting cotton, whether you're playing golf like Damichael does, whether you're doing, a little bit of barbecuing out on the back deck, whatever kind of activity you like to partake in, Birddogs are the way to go. Plus, you get a free Yeti-style tumbler with every order. So, as long as you use birddogs.com/lockedonnba, it could be you with that free Yeti-style tumbler. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnba for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you. We also promise you that coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit about the cost and a lot more about how Marcus Smart, the newest member of the Memphis Grizzlies entering draft day, fits with this team. We'll talk about it next. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Again, we thought this was going to be a draft preview show. We were all lined up, ready to rock and load, and lo and behold, Adrian Wojnarowski gets the report. We get confirmation Marcus Smart is heading to Memphis. And we talked about in the first segment, Damichael, how we reacted positively. I saw a surprising amount of negativity on the Grizzlies Twitter timeline. I was surprised because, people like me, in fairness, but a lot of other folks, we have all these picks. Why do we have all these picks? What do we need all these picks for? Okay, well, we just traded two of them. Right, number 25 in the draft tonight is no longer in Memphis. It's on its way out, going to Boston. And Boston now also has the Golden State 2024 first-round pick that the Grizzlies acquired through the Andre Iguodala situation a few years ago. So those picks are no longer here. The Memphis Grizzlies still have every single one of their own first-round picks, starting with next year's draft. They have numerous second-round picks, including two still in tonight's proceedings. I was very much okay with the cost. I think that people don't fully understand the value of Marcus Smart. And I also think that people don't fully understand that it's kind of the cost of doing business when you are trying to bring in someone to help kickstart a culture, when you're trying to bring in someone that has the pedigree that Smart has. We can say that Tyus Jones is the best backup point guard in the NBA all we want. And as I've said before, I don't agree with that. He's really good at filling in as a starter, but he struggled as a reserve point guard last season. Now Tyus, and we'll talk more about Tyus later, but he has a chance to go be a starter in Washington, presumably. He'll go run that offense, and assuming, Chris Paul's not there long term. Notice that deal hasn't been finalized yet. And I do believe that you have a capacity now with Marcus Smart coming in to check all the boxes that we talked about. Perimeter wing defender. Or a premier wing defender. He can play next to Ja Morant because of his elite defense. All the different types of matchups they can throw out there. So much different malleable pieces. Were you surprised at all by the negativity? There were a lot of folks that said this was, Dylan Brooks essentially, or this was a downgrade from Tyus Jones. I think people are just looking at box scores and not actually watching Marcus Smart play basketball.
A lot of people who don't know what they're talking about. I'm sorry because I
Except
never.
For you, dear listener, dear viewer, you're watching Locked On Grizzlies or listening to Locked On Grizzlies, so you know
what you're doing. This is not for our Locked On Grizzlies people out there, but in the simplest forms, let's go to the value conversation. You say, two first-round picks is too much. Well, guess what? For one, these are two first-round picks expected to be very low on the totem pole here. You're talking about the 25th pick in a draft And you talk about potentially a pick from the Golden State Warriors next season that probably won't have as much value as well. I mean, we see the Draymond Green situation, how that plays out. But outside of that, Steph Curry is still in the building. So not expecting them to fall too far regardless. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. The main reason you're paying two late first-round picks potentially, or just 2 first-round picks in general, for the services of Marcus Smart. For one, let's talk about just the value of a player of his status in the NBA.
Absolutely.
Remember, we had just talked about this, recently, how there were reports indicating that the Brooklyn Nets, during the season were turning down multiple 2 first-round picks for Dorian Finney-Smith.
Which, by the way, for the
he's
record,
not as good as Marcus Smart.
Well, I'm sorry to cut you off, partner. If they had done this trade for Dorian Finney-Smith, you would have had a Mullinax outburst. Like, you would have had a first segment. That's absolutely ridiculous. Dorian Finney-Smith, we don't even know if this dude can play the 3. Let's give Tyus Jones and 2 first-round picks. We have seen Marcus Smart be able to defend bigger guys like Drew Holiday, to your point from earlier.
Yeah. So the value conversation, right? In terms of the financial part of this. So Marcus Smart right now is on a 4-year, $76 million deal, averages around $19 million per season. Here's why that's important. He has 3 years left, 2023, this upcoming season, and then 2 more years after that. So the Grizzlies not only acquired Marcus Smart, but they got his services for 3 seasons. If there was just 1 year left on this deal, you probably wouldn't even cost you 1 first-round pick, maybe 1 first-round pick in Tyus Jones. If there were 2 years left on this deal, you're probably getting a first round, 2 seconds, or something like that. But the fact that the Grizzlies have control of Marcus Smart for 3 more seasons, cost control from a salary standpoint, and the contract is team-friendly. We've talked about how important it is for the Grizzlies to acquire a guy who, in the case of Marcus Smart, his contract is projected to take up around 12 to 13% of the salary cap. That is huge because of the fact that going into next season, not this upcoming season, but the 2024-2025 season, Desmond Bane, John Morant, and Jaren Jackson Jr., depending on where Dez's number falls at when he signs his extension, those 3 players are going to take up more than 2/3 of the Grizzlies' salary cap. Once you factor in Brandon Clark, Steven Adams, and now Marcus Smart, this is an extremely good deal from that standpoint. So we talked about the value in terms of the position versatility on offense, point guard, shooting guard, can play the 3, can guard 1s, can guard 2s, can guard 3s. We've seen him guard 4s in stretches. Like, this guy is no scrub defensively. He is a dog. The veteran leadership standpoint of it, here's what I like. 9 seasons in the NBA, 9 postseason appearances. Like, it's no coincidence that the Celtics team the year before him sucked, and then he comes in. I think they went 40-42 that first year, made the first round of the playoffs, and took off from that point on. Marcus Smart is a winner. He's a culture changer. He's going to be great for John Morant. He's going to be great for the Grizzlies overall. And from the decision-making standpoint, I don't want to linger on with that part too much because, quite frankly, I don't think you succeed to the level of Marcus Smart by being a terrible decision-maker. I mean, this is a guy who's been to the finals. He's been to the Eastern Conference Finals several years, and he's been a big part of what the Celtics have created there. I think he's a great fit for the Grizzlies on the floor, off the floor, and the best fit to me, the best part of it is the financial part. The Grizzlies not only acquired Marcus Smart, but this isn't some rental. This is a guy that you're penciling into your core for the next 3 seasons.
He is a core piece. He's in his prime, right?
Yeah.
Over the next 3 years, he goes from 29 to 30 to 31 years old. He's in the prime of his career, and his prime will end, or his contract at least will end, as Ja, Bane, and Jaren reach their primes, at least theoretically speaking, around 26, 27 years old. So the timeline has shifted here. And again, I've been asking for go all in, push in some chips. This isn't all in. Marcus Smart is not OG Anunoby. Marcus Smart is obviously not Mikal Bridges, but he is an investment in winning now. This is the starting point of saying, okay, they want to win now. And this is also the starting point of them saying we can win without Ja Morant right now, because Marcus Smart starting in that role for the reasons you outlined earlier about defense. Now you can start Bane and Kennard together.
That lineup can win some games.
Massively important. That's extremely valuable. The Grizzlies still have some things to figure out, right? They have an open roster spot still. They have a couple of second-round picks later on in the draft, so there's still some possibilities for what Memphis can do, and we'll talk about what some of that might look like going into the draft next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I want to make sure that we tell you guys not to miss Locked On NBA's draft live show on Thursday night. Pick-by-pick analysis from our stable of local NBA hosts like me. I don't know how much I'll be popping in anymore because the Grizzlies don't have a first-round pick, at least as of now. National reaction from our NBA Big Board hosts and live check-ins from inside the NBA draft. We at Locked On Podcast Network have boots on the ground in Brooklyn. Locked On NBA live starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, so that is 6:30 p.m. Central Time on the Locked On NBA YouTube page. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Anytime you're trying to build a championship team, it's about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that the part will fit or your money back. Just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. With over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. It's easy to bring home a win with the right parts when they are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. We will be talking the current state of the Memphis Grizzlies draft next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, finishing up an emergency episode of the pod with my good friend Damichael Cole and co-host there at the Commercial Appeal, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer. I, of course, of Bluff City Media. We have tons of draft content out right now at Bluff City Media between us and our Grizzlies work, and between Damichael, of course, over the Commercial Appeal, and both of us combined here at Locked On Grizzlies. You've got everything you need to get ready Memphis Grizzlies-wise. We're going to have plenty more on Marcus Smart. We're going to have plenty more on Tyus Jones, saying goodbye to him as he heads off to Washington. I think that's a good fit for him, and we'll talk about why, again, assuming Chris Paul moves on. But I do want to Damichael, because there is a draft tonight. We don't necessarily need to talk about the second round the whole time here, because maybe there's another move to be made. I don't know that there will be. But it's possible. And I think that the other move to be made might be maybe combining number 45 and number 56 to try to move up if there's a player in particular they really like. I'll give the name that I really like in that kind of scenario. And then, of course, I'll let you chime in on your end. I really, really, really like Kobe Brown of Missouri. I think that he is a player who has a lot of skill. He is going to be one of those guys that's falling because of his age. He's 23 and a half years old, essentially. He was born in 2000, the old fart, right? Goodness gracious, 23 years old. But he is elite at his position in terms of assist turnover ratio. Speaking of Tyus Jones, he does a great job shooting the three. He shot 45.5% from three this past season. Now, it was only on 3.3 attempts per game. So you'd like to see that number go up, of course, but he was almost 80% from the free throw line. So that tells you that he's got a good shooting mechanic, a good shooting stroke. He's going to really kind of pop off the screen most offensive statistics in terms of true shooting percentage, things like that. He's not the best defender. At least he hasn't shown that consistently, which is one of the reasons he's in that second round range. But I'm a big Kobe Brown guy. He's a guy that's projected to be picked a little bit before where Memphis goes. So if Brown's still on the board around pick 40 or pick 41, I wouldn't hate them combining those 2 seconds to try to go get him.
I like that selection. I like that one a lot. You almost just convinced me. But I have another guard too in a similar mode. I've been looking at a couple mock drafts that have this guy projected to go in the low 40s, potentially high 30s to mid 40s, which would be perfect in the case of the Grizzlies, who picked 45th and 56th. If you see that board moving in the second round and a lot of guards are getting taken, I think going after Marcus Sasser. How about that? Adding another Marcus guard.
Smart and Marcus Sasser.
Yeah. To the equation. And this is simple for me. I think right now, potentially with the Grizzlies, you're probably going to add, if you combine those, you're going to add this guy on a two-way deal.
Yeah.
Which will leave one standard roster spot open. Now, of course, the Grizzlies, like we keep outlining that number, but of course, in theory, the Grizzlies can take more guys into training camp, who are on contracts, but they'll just have to cut them. They'll be on non-guaranteed deals or whatever the case may be.
The exhibit 10s. Yeah.
Exactly. And even, guys they want to sign for veteran minimum. They just cut them loose, and that'll be that. But we'll pretty much have a good idea of which guys the Grizzlies want to keep. But in this case, Marcus Sasser, see, there we go, makes good sense. Makes perfect sense for me. He's a shot creator. He's a three-point shooter. And I think in the second round, you should target those veteran guards. So we're on the same wavelength of thinking here. You go get a veteran guard because the idea should be in these first 25 games without Josh. Sure, you're going to have what looks like it'll be Marcus Smart and Desmond Bane kind of playing point guard duties. Marcus Smart starting and Desmond Bane potentially running with the second unit. But that's a 25-game span. You're not talking 5 or 6 games. Mm-hmm. So since it's 25 games, there is the slight possibility that one of those guys may have to miss a game here or there. And in the potential, if that's the case, you want to have a guy like Marcus Sasser who has played, a lot of college basketball, who can come in and maybe adjust to the game a little bit quicker than one of those freshman guards who may take a year or two. The shot creation is plus. The three-point shooting is plus. Defensively, you never know how those guys can translate at the NBA level, but collegiately, at the collegiate level, Marcus Sasser was pretty good on the ball. So I like him in that spot as well. And then I think, you can potentially say that leaves another spot for you to go out and acquire a wing in free agency. But I'll say it like this, Joe, and I'll let you fill in as well. I think now with the move for Marcus Smart, I feel like you zero in in the second round on going to get another guard to go behind those guys, because the wing, we can talk about them needing another wing all we want, but they have depth, and they have now the potential to add another player in free agency. Then the front court is just loaded. I mean, it's guys everywhere in the front court. So I think going out to get a guard, going out to get an experienced guard, I like your choice. I like my choice in Marcus Sasser as well.
Yeah, I like Kobe Brown because he can play, and you've talked about it here on Locked On Grizzlies before. You hear Taylor Jenkins in press conferences. They value guys that can play the 2 through the 4, right? And Kobe Brown can do that. He literally did that at Missouri. But I love your Marcus Sasser idea, especially with Ja out. He's an older guy who can come in and contribute if necessary. You mentioned those first 25 games. Goodness gracious forbid something happens to Marcus Smart or something happens to Desmond Bane, and they need someone to eat some of those minutes. I think Sasser makes a lot of sense in the second round. When you compare to who else might be available, he's probably the best option. I also like Jalen Slauson of Furman. Yeah. I think he's a good guy, and it's partially because he beat up on my University of Virginia Cavaliers.
Yeah, you remember him, don't you?
I remember him very well, yes. So he would be a good fit in a similar way. And Sean Coleman, shout out to our mutual friend, former host here on Locked On Grizzlies, Sean Coleman. He wrote his annual, for those that don't know, Sean literally predicted the Grizzlies draft a couple years ago, and that he went viral for it. So he's come up with the formula. He certainly understands what the Grizzlies type is, and both Brown and Slauson are on that list. So that's, kudos to Sean for writing that piece. And, I've always liked Slauson, but he opened my eyes a little bit more to Brown. So I did a little more research, and I'm on the Kobe Brown train now as well. And I think Chip Williams over at Bluff City Media also likes Brown. So 2 smart guys beyond me, if you don't want to trust me, that are in on Kobe Brown. But Marcus Sasser makes a ton of sense too. Again, because of the fact that they're going to need a guy to potentially do that, given how, the NBA season is a war of attrition in a lot of ways, given the schedule. Whew, I got to tell you, partner, we're going to have to do this all over again. Another late night coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies as we will do a draft recap. You'll have a chance to speak with Zach Kleiman. Again, I don't know who they're going to select anymore if they go into the first round, if they move up in the second, but you'll have a chance to talk to him about Marcus Smart at the very least coming out of the post-draft situation. If the deal is announced, sometimes they're not going to be able to because that's not finalized.
I doubt it, but
he can kind of hint at it and be like, "Oh, it'd be a
wonderful." We'll give him a chance to talk about Tyus Jones and what he meant. But
there you go.
I'm looking forward to it. Finally, just getting to catch up. We also get to touch on some of the Josh stuff, and we'll cover all that as well in our next episode too.
Looking forward to it. And the Grizzlies will likely select someone. I would be surprised if they didn't make a single draft pick in the draft. So we'll have a prospect to discuss as well on our Friday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for being with us wherever you're taking in the show, wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. And make sure you're with us for our Friday edition, recapping the draft, getting a little bit more in depth with the Marcus Smart news, all sorts of stuff on Tyus Jones as well, because, again, Tyus is currently technically still on the roster, so he can talk a little bit more, Zach Kleiman can, about Tyus per NBA rules. It's going to be a jam-packed, loaded edition of Locked On Grizzlies on Friday. You don't want to miss it. Make sure you're following, rating, liking, subscribing, all of those fun things. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. See you Friday.